Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name's Carter Mackey.
This is episode 7, where we're going to be talking about the card game Maximum Apocalypse, which is basically what's happened to my voice in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, it doesn't sound great.
Yeah, it really doesn't. So I apologize for you all listening to this. I'm going to do my best to edit out my hacking and coughing. There's nothing I can do about the deep, Barry Manilow thing that I've got going on here, though.
I mean, is that bad, though?
No, it's not that bad. I've basically wanted this since puberty, and it just never happened.
Right.
So we're going to get through it, though. Before we get to the game of the week, we're going to start with the news. Our first news story for this week is that Renegade Games is going to be republishing Arboretum, the small card game from Z-Man Games, designed by Dan Kasser. This is a game that met with all kinds of critical acclaim when it came out, and then instantly became unavailable. And because it's published by Z-Man Games, it never really came back into print. That seems to be their MO with these kind of games.
Right.
Yeah, you played this game with me before, right?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I did have a copy before I sold it for $90 because capitalism.
Yeah.
So now that it's coming back in print, though, I do plan to buy it at the normal MSRP price of $14.99 or whatever it is, because it's getting new illustrations from Beth Sobel, who does games like Sunset Over Water, and she's going to make the game a little bit more colorblind friendly. And I mentioned this on this show because Arboretum has a little known solo variant that I played several times and really, really enjoyed. So even if you've never heard of this as a solo game before, keep it on your radar. It's one that we'll probably cover down the road. So that game's coming out in Q3 of 2018. The second big piece of news for this week is that AEG has announced Thunderstone Quest 2nd Edition. And if you're saying to yourself, is Thunderstone Quest even out yet? The answer is yes, just barely. They ran a Kickstarter for this sometime last year, and as I understand it, it just got delivered to backers like in the last 2 weeks.
How are they able to already come out with a new edition? Like, what have they changed?
As far as I know, I think they're only adding a couple new quests or scenarios to the main box, so I don't think it's actually going to be that different. Okay. I think they just didn't print enough to keep it in stock at retail anywhere. But this edition is going to add solo rules to the game. And it was always a mystery to me why they didn't add them to Quest, because the first 2 editions of Thunderstone did have solo rules. It was very popular with the solo community.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they just stripped those out and made it a multiplayer game. And in the email where they announced this, they said that this is the most requested feature for a new edition. So if you're interested in that, I know I am. Keep your eye on Kickstarter. It's coming there in June, and you'll be able to play it solo finally. And finally, the last announcement for today, Stonemaier Games has announced My Little Scythe, which is from designer Hobie Chu. I don't know how you pronounce the name. This is fascinating to me because this is exactly what it sounds like. It's like My First Stone Age or Catan Jr. only for Scythe.
Huh.
And this has had an interesting life on Board Game Geek because this started out as a fan-made print and play project that was retheming Scythe with the My Little Pony theme.
Yeah, awesome.
And it got all kinds of praise online from the Brony community,
right?
Which I'm not a part of and do judge and condemn.
Right.
But it did lead to this game, so what do I know? A lot of people thought that was a great idea. Apparently, Jamie Stegmaier did too. He picked it up. Obviously, they can't do the My Little Pony theme with it because that takes licensing.
And probably a lot of money.
Oh, yeah, probably a lot of money. But they turned all the little animal characters that your characters have in the original into these cute little cartoony bits. And so now it's a friendly family game that's based on Scythe that plays 1 to 6 players. So I presume that means that it's going to have rules from the Automa factory, because that company tends to do rules for all the Stonemaier games.
Okay.
And if that's the case, I mean, they are the premier maker of solo modes for board games. So if you are interested in Scythe but thought that it was too intimidating and you want more, I don't know, chibi cuteness in your game, then this is the one for you. It's only available for pre-order for a short while, and then I think we'll have to wait until Gen Con when it hits. So you can pre-order for pickup at Gen Con if you would like. All right, that's all there is for the news today. Short news week. We're going to get into the game of the week now, which is Maximum Apocalypse. And this is a game from Rock Manor Games and designer, I'm going to go with Mike Nade. I don't know how you say his name. It's a game for 1 to 6 players, small box game that uses tiles and cards and puts you in the role of an adventurer who's traveling a post-apocalyptic landscape, trying to look for supplies or escape or battle the denizens of this post-apocalyptic wasteland. You know, it changes with whatever scenario you picked for your play session. But that's the gist of it. You're going to wander around, fight things, and look for supplies. So let's just jump right in here to the components.
I mean, I think all of the art for this game is fantastic. The cards feel good. They seem high quality. Yeah, I can't really think of anything bad. I mean, just the box, the package, everything about it seems just real solid. The cardboard tiles.
Yes. And the wooden tokens. We have the deluxe version, which is the one that folks who back this on Kickstarter got.
Right.
So we might have some extra apocalypses in the box. Because the game comes with, you choose whether you're fighting against the zombie apocalypse or the robot takeover of the world or Mad Max style Wastelander enemies.
Right.
You know, so we might have maybe more of those than is in the retail edition. One thing I do know is different with our edition, though, is that it comes with these little wooden tokens for gas cans or for bullets. Those look great. They're not necessary at all.
No, not at all.
I would say if you're buying this game at retail, you're really not missing out on anything. But otherwise, everything in the box is great. You know,
yeah.
Cards feel good. Tiles are thick. The box size is a little weird. It's long and skinny.
Right.
If you stand it up on its end, it's actually the same height as like a Ticket to Ride size box.
Okay.
So if it bothers you having small box games on your shelf, then you could just blend it into your collection
just
that way.
Pretend that it's a big box game.
Yeah. I might be speaking from personal experience on
right.
that. That's how I stored it on my shelf. But otherwise, everything's great. So components wise is wonderful. And the artwork is fantastic. And this is some of the most stylish, interesting art that I've seen in a game recently. It's not quite like anything else. It doesn't have the smooth edges, I guess, that something from Fantasy Flight would have. It's more comic booky in nature.
Yeah, just kind of like like kind of sketch comic book style.
Yeah, but it looks fantastic.
Yeah,
and the graphic design is wonderful too. And I would say that approachability also carries over to the rules as well. The rule book for this game is very short.
Yeah.
Very easy to get into the rules. I mean, it took me maybe 10 minutes to read through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And felt pretty good about it.
Yeah, I felt like I understood what I was going to be doing and whatnot.
Yeah. No issues with the rules in that regard. It's very approachable and easy to get into. The problem comes when you start to actually set up the game.
Yeah, I was looking more forward to it until I tried to set up, and it was just... I mean, the easiest way to explain it is it's really unelegant. I wish there was a more elegant way to set up this game.
Yeah, but the way they've constructed it, there's really not. Because part of this game is you're going to be scavenging for supplies. And so you have to set up this little board that's comprised of 3 different decks of supplies. And over the course of the game, you'll be drawing from these decks to see if you get the supplies you need to survive or beat the mission. The problem with this is you don't just draw a random number of cards and add it to this supply board over here. You have to take the larger deck of supply cards and say, okay, I need 9 food cards from this deck and 3 bullets and 2 medical supplies.
1 flashlight.
Right. And the same thing is true with the tiles. When you're making up the tiles that make up the map of the landscape, you're actually shuffling through this deck of tiles and saying, okay, I need 2 fields and I need 2 barns. And I know this doesn't sound like much, but I cannot understand why other reviews are not talking about this. I feel like when I get a small box game, I want some depth there, but part of the beauty of a small box experience is I don't have the setup and teardown time of like an Eldritch Horror or some other big box game.
Right. I mean, I would even say City of Kings, for instance, which also had a tile setup where you set those in a grid at the beginning of the game. I mean, it had a numbered tile system where this is like this group of tiles is tile set 1, this is 2, 3, 4, so on. And so when you're setting it up, it just says get these sets. And so you're not like looking through having to read individual names. You just kind of keep it organized by sets. You take them out, put them back in. I mean, still takes some time. It's not like nothing, but I mean, this felt like, okay, I have to go through every single tile, figure out what I need, and then check. I mean, because you can't like hold all the tiles in hand at once to like easily shuffle through it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's awkward. And it's like, well, I only need one gas station, but there's two. I can't remember. Did I get the one gas station? I don't know. It's just awkward. That's just really what it comes down to. It's an awkward setup to me.
Yeah, and we had this experience independent of one another because we just talked about our experience with this game before we started recording. And I was surprised that Carter had the same experience that I did. I don't know. I feel like for me, this took almost as much time to set up as something like the City of Kings would, which is crazy. So, and even Eldritch Horror, which I've always found to be tedious to set up, doesn't seem that bad by comparison.
Right.
So,
yeah, building the deck for Eldritch Horror is like, I think, a little bit more straightforward than this. Once again, you're having to like shuffle through the entire deck and find specific items.
And the goal of this, I think, is to mitigate somewhat the luck of what's in these decks when you go to pull from them.
Right.
But it just doesn't feel like it's worth, the payoff isn't worth what you have to do to set up on the front end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I wish there was just a more elegant solution for it. That's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah. Well, and the sad news is, from my end, the inelegance also bleeds over into the gameplay as well.
Yeah.
So the gameplay is actually pretty simple. At the beginning of each game, you've picked your apocalypse, you've picked the mission that you're going to do for this particular play session, and then you pick two different heroes, or not really heroes, survivors, I guess.
Right.
And instead of playing two-handed through this game, because it's a cooperative style game,
right,
and that often happens with cooperative games,
right,
I was impressed that they came up with a method to try to streamline that, because nobody really likes playing two-handed if you can help it.
Right.
So what they have you do is take each character's unique deck of cards and just shuffle them together like Smash Up, essentially.
Right.
And then on your turn, you're going to draw basically just twice the number of cards you would if you were playing this with one character in a multiplayer game.
Right.
And I thought that sounded like an interesting idea. In practice, though, it doesn't really work for me.
Yeah, whenever I read that initially, I was like, oh, that's a nice way just to kind of like streamline that one, I guess, kind of typical part of playing a like solo cooperative game. But yeah, when I started doing it, I was like, this doesn't feel great. I mean, sure, I guess it streamlines it a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. It feels weird.
Yeah, I mean, you're quickly ending up with like 15 cards in your hand at a time, which feels clunky.
Yes.
Just as you're playing, it feels like, oh, I just wish I had a smaller hand of cards. Even I wouldn't have as many options, but I also wouldn't spend half my time at the table shuffling through what I've got in my hand to read the text.
Right.
And I mean, on your turn, the games are pretty simple in that you just choose, am I going to move to another tile to explore or try to get closer to whatever destination I'm looking for? Am I going to fight one of the creatures in front of me? Because as you attract creatures in this game and get their attention, they come in front of your player and you have to fight them. So you can take an action to do that, or you can try to scavenge cards. And a lot of these actions then, I guess the other main action of the game is that you actually play a card from your hand and equip it, essentially.
Right. So
once you've equipped cards, then you can take the actions that are on them. None of that feels good to me. Part of it is just the clunkiness of dealing with the cards. That definitely doesn't help.
Yeah, it's the clunkiness of the cards, and I think also it's just neither of the player decks. Oh, I say neither. I mean, really any of the player decks. They never felt like super like themed.
No.
And they didn't. I guess. I mean, they're themed and they're different, and they have kind of like different abilities and whatnot. But it was never like super compelling, or I guess I really felt like they were like. It was just a unique take on it. Like, I mean, for something like Smash Up, like whatever you're choosing, like the abilities you get and how that compares to the other like factions, or, another game where you're choosing a hero and what the way your abilities or stats work, and making your character feel like, okay, this is what it's about.
Right. And I don't mind if thematically it doesn't feel great, as long as mechanically it's really solid.
Right.
I mean, I want it to be both, but
right.
As our review with City of Kings said last week, the theme doesn't always work well in that game. But in this game, the mechanic piece of it isn't interesting really either. like you said, the decks aren't themed well. And so I don't have a thematic connection to my character. And then when I'm actually playing down a card, what it feels like is, great, now I have another way to hit a thing.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like exciting or like character growth in the way that I want from an adventure game.
Yeah, it's not adding compelling mechanics to my character.
No. And that's, I think, exacerbated by the fact that if I'm playing the surgeon character and the hunter character, as you mentioned that you were doing, right, that you can equip items from either character's deck to either character because they're both in your hand.
Right.
So that means then your surgeon's drill could go to your hunter.
Right.
Which doesn't make a ton of sense. I mean, it's goofy, can be kind of funny, I guess. But what also doesn't make sense is that drill does the same amount of damage to an enemy as like a gun would do.
Right. Or, well, what is it as a gun? But I mean, like, I know the hunter's machete. I mean, it's identical.
Yeah. Which doesn't make any sense.
Right.
To me.
I feel like the hunter should have some kind of like combat advantage and the medic should have more support. I don't know.
Yeah. I never felt like the surgeon was particularly good at doing what you would think a surgeon would be that great at.
Right.
I mean, he does have better healing abilities, but it doesn't feel markedly different from what everybody else is doing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like the one I found most interesting was the veteran and dog. Like, that's like kind of a cool, I guess, like concept to like having a little like moving that around. But yeah, I don't know. Other than that, I mean, it was just like that kind of initial idea was cool, but the cards didn't do it for me.
And then once you actually get the characters moving around the map and exploring things, that doesn't feel great either, because I love the feeling of exploration in games.
Yes.
Right. But when you flip over a tile in this game, it just feels sort of like phase 10 kind of randomness to me. I mean, you flip over a tile and great, now you can't move anywhere for the rest of the turn or you'll attract monsters.
Right.
Or surprise, a monster ambushes you. I don't know. It just feels arbitrary in a way that was not fun for me.
Right. Yeah. The exploration felt more punishing and not like I was really exploring. Yeah. It just wasn't a ton of interesting choices to be made throughout.
Yeah. I think that's true because you basically end up just making a beeline for wherever your final destination is going to be.
Right.
Unless you don't find the equipment that you need along the way or something like that, then you might try to explore tiles outside of that direct path. But otherwise, there's no point, because if you try to deviate from that path, exploration needs to be rewarded with something. You're rarely rewarded with anything.
Yeah, there's a couple of tiles, but not many.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Exploration didn't feel good to me. Attacking and fighting in this game also didn't feel great. I mean, it's deterministic. And so, if I have a weapon that does 3 damage and I say I'm going to take an action with that weapon, then that enemy's going to take 3 damage. And that's good. But it just feels like a math problem, but not an interesting one.
Yeah, it's just not, I don't feel like I'm problem solving.
Yeah, maybe
like,
that's it.
Like, for instance, like with City of Kings, which could be very mathy. But yeah, I don't know. It was like I was trying to figure something out, and this was just not as interesting decisions.
Yeah, and when we compare this game to City of Kings, we're doing it, number one, because we just played it recently.
Right. And I think it has a lot of similarities in like some ways.
Yeah, I mean, they're both exploration and adventure style games.
Right.
I mean, one of them is a big box game and one of them is a small box game. Right.
Yes.
So they're not, it's apples and oranges, except to say that one proves that the other could have done things in a more interesting way.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. The combat feels uninteresting in that way. It's just I choose to apply 3 damage to you, or I choose instead to ignore this enemy and look for supplies,
Right.
And there's not really, the consequences aren't that great because each character has a lot of health.
Yeah.
And it does get chipped away during the course of the game, but I never felt in too much danger of actually dying.
But can we talk about starvation?
Yeah, except for starvation. It's not every turn. Basically, you have this die that sits on your character card that starts at 6, and every turn the die is going to move down a number, to 5, 4, 3, 2, etc. And then when you reach 1 and you have to turn the die to 0, that's when you flip your character card to the starving side. So when you do that, you lose your character's abilities, and basically you start taking damage every turn that you don't eat. And I think that's thematic and cool, and I do like that. My problem is the only way to get food in this game is to take the scavenge action. And this is what makes me hate this game.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was never, ever bothered by feeding my people in Agricola, it felt so annoying and just like burdensome to constantly have to worry about. Because I mean, I feel like it ticks up at a pretty fast clip.
It does. And I think why it is less bothersome in Agricola. I mean, I don't like it in Agricola either.
Yeah, I know
I just
have
don't
more
like
of a
that
problem.
mechanic.
Right.
But in this game, it feels worse when you're playing because if I have to find food if I'm going to survive, right? Which is thematic. I
Right.
get that. You got to scavenge food. But the way scavenging works in this game is you take a scavenge action and you draw from one of those supply decks that you had to tediously assemble at the beginning of the game. Okay, the problem with that is it's a random pull. So I have had games where I'm starving to death looking for some kind of food and I'm just not getting to any food in these decks. And from the beginning which of these decks have more food in them. So probability-wise, if I want food, I need to find the kind of tile that gives me access to the deck that has the most food in it. And then probability-wise, there's more of a chance I'll pull some food. And I get how that works thematically. It's just that moment to moment when you're playing, it doesn't feel fun to just spend whole turns basically trying to pull cards at random from a deck, hoping that you'll get something that will give you some food that will just turn that die back up a couple of pips.
Right. And I guess, I think of Dead of Winter, because it obviously has, needing to scavenge for food and have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. It's a very similar theme. It just never bothered me in Dead of Winter, though. It didn't feel as, burdensome.
Yeah. Maybe it's just because there's only 6 turns before you lose your character's ability, which is part of what makes the game interesting.
Right.
You're taking that away from your character, and also the randomness is so strong in that for me that it's a major turnoff.
But I mean, don't you feel like there's a lot of randomness in Dead of Winter? Why doesn't it feel so bad in that?
I don't know. Is there as much time before you start starving in Dead of Winter?
It's been too long.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's not been long enough. I don't really like Dead of Winter.
Right.
But I see what you mean, though. It didn't bother me in that game either. I'm not sure what I would suggest to fix this problem. I wish there was some slightly more deterministic way to get food in this game. I mean, I think there's a character who's better at getting food. But I want, some tiles, for instance, to be in the pile where if you go and scavenge, you will definitely get a food. Or something like that. So I'm not just always dependent on this card pull. And that card pull system really just messed me over as far as completing missions was concerned, too.
Right.
I mean, you can play as smart as you want to in this game. I don't think there's that many opportunities to make meaningful choices here.
Right.
But even if you're trying to think ahead and plan, at the end of the day, a mission's goal is get 4 cans of gas and get to the van to escape. The way you get those cans of gas isn't by visiting certain locations on the map. So intentionally leading you to explore new places in a way that would reward you. It's just find a tile that lets you scavenge this type of card and just keep taking that scavenge action and pulling those random cards until you get what you need. At the end of the day, even when I'm playing a post-apocalyptic game, I want to feel good about it.
Yeah.
Fallout manages to make me feel good about it. The video game, not the board game.
Right.
That one's not good. But, there needs to be something in there that keeps me coming back. And so exploring doesn't feel good, and scavenging doesn't feel good, and the act of fighting doesn't feel good. The sort of cherry on top for me of this terrible, terrible Sunday is how enemy placement works. So when you flip up a new tile, the tile has a number on it. And essentially you roll a couple of dice at the beginning of your turn. And if the numbers on the dice match the number of a tile, then an enemy token will be put on it. So in some games, because enemy placement works that way, for the most part, there are other ways to run into enemies in kind of random ways when you explore. But for the most part, that's how enemy placement works. in some games, I managed to have a whole map where I didn't run into a single enemy. And I realized the chances of that are probably pretty low. But that meant my whole game was just saying, okay, I'm going to pull another card from the scavenge deck. I'm going to pull another card from the scavenge deck. Okay, I'm going to move to another tile. It was in no way challenging or interesting.
Yeah.
It basically feels like Settlers of Catan for how you get resources in Settlers. Only instead of getting wood and sheep that I can trade for wheat, bad things.
Right. Yeah, it feels bad.
So I don't think we really have that much more to say about gameplay because that's really all there is. I mean, you do have different apocalypses and you do have different missions. But honestly, of the ones that I played, they feel mostly the same. I mean, it's nice to have the graphical stuff changed up from game to game. You know?
Yeah.
It's good that I have the option not to play a zombie apocalypse because I'm pretty over zombies as a rule.
Right, yeah.
But I really like the idea of fighting wastelanders. I like the idea of fighting a robot invasion. You know, I think that stuff is awesome. And in the expansion that they had on Kickstarter recently, the Gothic Horrors expansion, they add like a biblical apocalypse, which is, I mean, it's a great idea. All these things are great ideas. It looks fantastic. But when it comes right down to it, it doesn't feel different to play against those different apocalypses. The missions don't feel that different. And so even though it looks like you get a lot of replayability in the box, you know, because you're getting a random map layout every time. You're getting different characters every time.
Right. You can change the shape of the map.
Yeah, the shape of the map can be changed. I mean, on paper, this game is very replayable. For me, it's not. Number one, because I don't enjoy playing the game. And number two, because it just doesn't feel very different game to game.
Yeah.
Even when those things change.
Yeah.
So we're going to head right into the good, bad, and the ugly breakdown that we do with every game here. So for the good for this game, first of all, it just looks fantastic. This is a wonderfully produced package.
Yeah.
You know, even if you get the retail version and you don't have the little wooden tokens, you definitely don't need them.
Yeah, it's such a minor part.
It's a very minor part. You're not missing out on much. And it comes in a compact, beautiful package. And the theme for me is just great. I mean, this is exactly the kind of goofy off the wall theme that I want to see in a board game. This is the sort of thing that draws me in. And I really wanted to love this game because of the theme. That's what I'll say. I also want to say I think it's good that the designer tried to find a way to keep you from playing two-handed.
Yeah.
I mean, the shuffle two characters' decks together didn't work for me, but I really admire the effort that somebody took to try to make it so that I'm not managing two characters. And I wish more designers would do that sort of thing.
Right.
But for me, that's where the good things for this game end.
Yeah.
I think other than that, the play is uninteresting. The setup is tedious, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
The game for me was just unengaging throughout. And then the replayability, even though it should be there, and there's a lot in the box, for me, it just didn't feel different enough.
Every time I played, it was just very samey. I never felt like I was having to really deliberate and make interesting choices. And so that really kills the replayability for me.
Yeah, I felt the same way. But I wouldn't put any of those things in the ugly category necessarily. That for me, those are just, they're bad, but they're not the end of the world. For me, the only thing that goes in the ugly category is searching through the decks. That scavenge mechanic, I just really hate it.
Yeah, I guess just the way actions work, and it's just like, okay, well, I'll just keep taking this action until I get what I need. And it's just not compelling at all.
No, and I don't mind games that feel more on rails, right? Like Eldritch Horror, for me, I mean, you can make plenty of meaningful decisions in that game.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the game happens at you for the most part.
Right.
And I don't mind that as long as it's the kind of thematic experience that really carries you along and you can get lost in it.
Right.
And it just didn't happen for me here. But that said, we are 100% in the minority with this game.
Yeah, it seems that way.
I don't think I've heard a negative review of this so far. And we're not putting out a negative review just to be different from anybody else. I mean, this is just how we feel. I really, really, really wanted to like this game. I think Mike Nade and the folks at Rock Manor Games, you've done a great job putting this package together, and I would 100% check out other games that you put out in the future just because I'm interested to see what a publisher who puts out this kind of quality of packaging and idea for a theme can come up with. But I don't know. For me, this was just a miss. I feel like I'm missing something that everybody else gets.
Yeah.
So this one is not going to get the stamp of approval from us. We didn't really like it at all and would not recommend picking it up for solo play. Now, that said, again, we are one voice among many.
Right.
Check out other people because maybe this is right up your alley. A lot of people seem to be drawn into the theme in a way that we aren't. And I don't even necessarily think I would say that it's a bad game.
No.
It's just a game that didn't work for me.
Right.
The only part that I would say is bad is the scavenging part. But the rest of it, it just didn't engage me in particular.
I mean, maybe it'd be a little more fun with people. But as far as playing this by myself, I would just rather do something else.
Yeah, same for me too. So that's all we've got for you this episode. If you haven't done so yet, follow us on Facebook and keep up with everything we're doing there. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast, where we share pictures of new games we're getting or new games we've been playing. So follow us on there for more information. If you haven't done so yet, go on to iTunes, write us a review so we can get the attention of more folks and we can do more with this podcast. And if you have any questions for us, you can email us at solosauruspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, and we may end up responding to you on the podcast, depending on how things go. So that's all we have for this episode. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name's Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.